In the last 4 federal budgets, Nigeria's government spent a combined figure exceeding 2.4 trillion naira on what it officially classifies as palliative and social intervention programs. Fuel subsidy removal alone transferred an estimated 3.5 trillion naira in supposed savings back into the federal treasury. That's the official story. Here is the question nobody is asking loudly enough. Where did that money go? And why are the Nigerians who were promised relief now standing in the streets demanding it? While everyone is focused on the optics of these protests, how many cities, which roads were blocked, whether the police used live rounds, nobody is examining the institutional architecture behind the palliative system itself. Who designed it? Who controls the disbursement? And who has a structural interest in ensuring it never actually works? There is one figure who sits at the intersection of every major palliative program Nigeria has run in the last decade. The conditional cash transfers, the school feeding scheme, the survival fund. That figure is not a politician you will find trending on social media. And understanding why they have never been held publicly accountable may explain everything about why these protests keep happening in cycles. But before we get there, the protests are not new. The anger is not new. What is new and what should alarm every Nigerian watching this is the geography. This is no longer just Lagos and Abuja. It is spreading to secondary cities, Kano, Enugu, Benin, Kaduna, Calabar. When protest spreads like that across Nigeria's geopolitical zones simultaneously, it is not spontaneous. Something structural is breaking. Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis mainstream media is too afraid or too compromised. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets deeper. So what exactly happened? The immediate trigger is the government's latest round of palliative announcements, a combination of food distribution, cash transfer promises under the National Social Investment Program, the NSIP, and bus fare subsidies, all rolled out to cushion the continuing effects of fuel subsidy removal and the naira devaluation. That's the surface narrative. But the disbursement has been visibly chaotic. Stampedes at distribution centers, beneficiary lists that don't match the communities they claim to serve, market women and artisans who registered for the survival fund years ago and never received a single kobo. The government's official line is that implementation challenges are normal at scale, that the NSIP is reaching millions, and that the protests are being orchestrated by political opponents trying to destabilize the administration ahead of 2027. The coordinating minister of the economy has cited World Bank endorsements as proof that the program is structurally sound.
Here is what nobody is saying. Nigeria is currently running at least 6 overlapping palliative frameworks simultaneously, federal, state, and CBN-linked ones, with no unified beneficiary database, no independent audit trail, and oversight responsibilities split between the Ministry of Human Affairs, the Ministry of Finance, and the Office of the Vice President. In any systems design context, that level of jurisdictional overlap does not create accountability. It eliminates it. This is not the first time Nigeria has been here. In 2012, under the Sure P program, fuel subsidy savings were ring-fenced and explicitly committed to social investment and infrastructure. By 2014, a committee of the House of Representatives had found that over 180 billion naira could not be fully accounted for. The protests of that era subsided. The money was never fully traced. Nigeria is now a full administration later, making the exact same institutional architecture and the exact same promises. But here is the fact that reframes this entire situation differently from how it's been reported. The Conditional Cash Transfer Program, the flagship federal palliative, targets 10 million households at 5,000 naira per month. At full implementation, that's 50 billion naira monthly. Independent researchers at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group found that actual verified disbursement has never exceeded 30% of announced figures in any single quarter since 2016. Read that again. The money is being appropriated. It is being announced. It is not arriving. And the gap between announcement and arrival is not a logistics problem. It's a policy architecture problem, and possibly something considerably more deliberate than that. Let us go deeper into the architecture, because this is where the real story lives. The NSIP was created in 2016 under an executive order, not an act of the National Assembly. That means it has never had a standalone appropriation law with forensic audit requirements attached to it. It operates under the Social Investment Office, housed variously in the Vice President's Office, the Ministry of Human Affairs, and more recently restructured under the Coordinating Minister's portfolio. Every restructuring resets the institutional memory. Every reset makes prior year reconciliation harder. And the people who benefit from that ambiguity are not the poor. They are procurement officers, program managers, and the political principals who appoint them. Now, who specifically wins and who loses in this current structure? The winners are the state governors who serve as last-mile gatekeepers for palliative distribution. Federal cash and food items are handed over to state governments for distribution. There is no federal enforcement mechanism. A governor aligned with the presidency receives resources, stays quiet, and builds local patronage. A governor in the opposition uses distribution failures as political ammunition against the federal government. Both outcomes serve someone. Neither outcome serves the beneficiary. Simultaneously, and this is the part that almost never gets reported, the private logistics contractors who manage storage and distribution are receiving billions in service contracts. These are names that do not appear in press releases. Their contract documentation on the Bureau of Public Procurement portal is minimal at best. But the layer beneath that, the one most analysts are missing entirely, is the 2027 electoral calculation embedded in this story. In 2027, the APC will need to defend the presidency in an environment of double-digit inflation, naira depreciation, and rising unemployment. The palliative system in that context is not social policy, it is electoral infrastructure. The ability to turn cash transfers on and off to swell beneficiary rolls in swing states in the 6 months before an election is a political asset of enormous value. That is precisely why real reform, a unified beneficiary registry, independent auditing, competitive procurement has been politically impossible. Reform would destroy the electoral utility of the system. The system is more useful broken than it is fixed. Now, look at the regional dynamics, because the protests are not uniform, and that matters strategically. In the southeast, community leaders and Ohaneze have framed the distribution failures as evidence of continued federal marginalization. That is a familiar grievance, but now it has specific documentable data behind it, which makes it considerably more dangerous politically. In the Northwest, where poverty rates are highest and the Buhari-era promise of NSIP reach was most politically loaded, the anger is less ethnic and more transactional. People registered, they were counted, they were never paid. In the Southwest, organized labor, the NLC and TUC, are amplifying the protests strategically, not because they control the movement, but because labor is using this moment to re-establish political relevance after being sidelined in the subsidy removal negotiations. Each of these blocs is using the same protests to advance a different agenda. The government knows this, and it is counting on that fragmentation to prevent national coordination. Now, look at who has not spoken, because silence here is its own signal. The World Bank has been conspicuously quiet. It co-designed and co-funds parts of the NSIP through its National Social Safety Net project. Public criticism of implementation from the bank would implicate its own program design, its own technical assistance, its own endorsement letters. The bank's silence is institutional self-protection. The Central Bank of Nigeria has also said nothing about the naira dimension of this failure, specifically the fact that beneficiaries receiving cash in a currency that has lost more than 2/3 of its real value are receiving a fraction of the real purchasing power the program's own targets projected. CBN's silence on that is not neutral. It is a signal that the bank has been functionally subordinated to the political timeline. Follow the money directly. The 2024 Appropriation Act contained 225 billion naira for social investment programs across multiple ministry lines. Add the humanitarian ministry's allocation and the figure exceeds 300 billion naira. Now, cross-reference the IPPIS payroll data against the NSIP beneficiary rolls, which the Auditor General's report flagged in 2022. What you find are ghost beneficiaries in at least 11 states, names on the federal beneficiary list that don't exist on any state-level community verification database, but for whom transfers are initiated and received somewhere. The mechanism is not complex, but it is systematic. And there's one institutional mechanism that connects every major social investment failure since 2016, the National Identity Management Commission database, and its integration, or deliberate lack of integration, with the National Social Register. The Social Register is maintained by the National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office. The gap between those two databases is where the leakage lives. And we will come back to exactly what that gap has enabled and who has resisted closing it. But here's what almost nobody has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture.
What is happening to Nigeria's federalism in real time is dangerous in a way that goes beyond the protests themselves. The palliative architecture has effectively created a second transfer system running parallel to the federation account. The federal government is using social intervention funds which bypass FARC entirely to build direct financial relationships with local government areas and ward-level coordinators. This circumvents state governors who are not politically aligned with Abuja. This is not federalism. It is a patronage network dressed in poverty reduction language. If it becomes permanent, the financial autonomy of opposition-controlled states will be structurally eroded, not by law, but by architecture. For ordinary Nigerians, the economics are brutal in a very specific way that the headlines are not capturing. The palliative program's internal targets were calibrated against a naira trading at 450 to the dollar. The naira is now trading above 1,500. No one in government has officially revised the program's impact projections. A 5,000 naira monthly transfer in 2016 was worth approximately $14. Today, it is worth approximately $3.30. The government is running the same announced headline, 10 million households, while delivering a fraction of the real value. That is not a communication failure. That is the construction of a policy illusion, and ordinary Nigerians are living inside it. The security dimension of this story is the most alarming development, and it is the one being most underreported. The spread of protests to Kano and Kaduna is not just politically significant, it is operationally dangerous. Both cities have documented histories of protest escalation into communal violence. Non-state actors, bandit negotiators, ethnic militia networks, political thugs affiliated with competing factions monitor protest spaces for recruitment and operational windows. A federal government that cannot credibly deliver palliatives in the Northwest is simultaneously weakening the consent-based alternative to what ISWAP and banditry's economic offer represent to young men in that corridor. Young men who are told they are on a beneficiary list and receive nothing are not just angry voters. They are, in that environment, active recruitment prospects. Now, the NIMC and social register gap I flagged earlier. Here is what that gap has specifically enabled. The social register, which determines who receives federal cash transfers, was built largely from community-based targeting surveys conducted by state-level social welfare offices. It was never fully merged with NIMC's biometric data. That means transfers can be initiated against names that carry no verified national identity number. Independent researchers at Budge IT, tracking NSIP disbursements in 2021 and 2022, found that between 15 and 22% of payment records in sampled states could not be matched to a verified NIN. That is not a data gap. That is a systematic extraction mechanism. Closing it has been recommended in writing by 3 successive auditors general, by the World Bank, and by SERAP. It has not been closed.
There is the data point that reframes the national stakes in a way that most Nigerians have not seen. Ghana's Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty program, a direct cash transfer scheme of comparable design, achieves a verified disbursement rate of over 90%, audited annually by an independent national commission. That program covers roughly 1.1 million households. Nigeria's program claims 10 times that reach. Ghana has a unified national identification system with biometric payment rails. Nigeria does not, despite having passed both the NIMC Act and the National Identity Management Commission Amendment Act. The legal and technical infrastructure for closing the gap exists in Nigerian statute. What does not exist is the political will to activate it, because activating it would end the leakage. And the leakage is not an accident. Now, I want to be fair to this analysis, and that means engaging honestly with the strongest possible defense of the current administration's approach. The most credible case goes like this. Nigeria is managing simultaneous macro shocks: fuel subsidy removal, naira float, food inflation, post-COVID fiscal pressure, with an inherited public debt burden that severely limits fiscal space. The World Bank's own program documents acknowledge that targeting accuracy in low data environments is inherently imperfect, and that community-based targeting, while imprecise, reaches populations that biometric systems miss. The administration's argument is that the NSIP, even imperfectly implemented, is the only operational social protection architecture Nigeria has at scale. Abolishing it or radically reforming it mid-crisis would leave millions of genuinely poor Nigerians with nothing while a new system is being built. The perfect, in other words, should not be the enemy of the functional. That argument is defensible in principle. It collapses on the specific evidence. The NIMC social register integration has been funded, technically scoped, and legally mandated for over 5 years. It has not been implemented. If the delay were genuinely about technical complexity, you would expect partial integration, pilot states, a phased rollout, some documented progress. What you find instead is a joint committee whose meetings are not publicly documented and whose timeline has been extended 4 times without public explanation. That is not a capacity failure. That is a decision. Furthermore, the claim that community-based targeting reaches populations the biometric system would miss does not explain why ghost beneficiaries, names with no community verification of any kind, appear consistently in the payment records of states with the strongest political networks tied to the ruling party. The defense conflates the genuine imprecision of poverty targeting with deliberate systemic extraction. They are not the same thing, and conflating them is analytically dishonest. There is also a misconception that most Nigerians watching these protests hold, and I want to correct it clearly. Most people believe the core problem is that the government doesn't care about the poor. That framing is emotionally satisfying but analytically wrong, and it is politically useful to those who want to keep this conversation at the level of sentiment rather than structure. The problem is not indifference. The problem is that a system has been designed, whether consciously or through accumulated institutional incentives, in which failing to deliver is more profitable than successfully delivering. A government that genuinely did not care about the poor would not spend 300 billion naira a year on social investment programs. It spends that money because the money itself, not its arrival at any beneficiary, is what generates political and financial returns. The system rewards disbursement initiation, not delivery confirmation. That distinction is everything.
If what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything. So what happens next? Let me give you 3 specific moves to watch for. The first move the administration will make is announcing a reform. Watch for language around biometric verification enhancement or beneficiary list cleansing. It will be framed as a direct response to the protests. It will be designed to absorb the political pressure without actually closing the NIMC social register gap, because closing that gap would expose the full scale of what has already been extracted. A surface-level reform, a new committee, a new deadline, a new World Bank technical assistance request is the most cost-effective political response available. It neutralizes the optics without touching the architecture. The second move is selective prosecution. 1 or 2 state-level program managers or logistics contractors will be publicly arrested and charged. This creates the appearance of accountability and directs public anger downward towards implementers rather than upward towards the policy architects. Nigeria has done this in every major program scandal from Surepi to the Anchor Borrowers Program. The prosecutorial machinery catches the middle layer. The principals rotate into new appointments. The third is protest fragmentation via ethnic and political framing. The government's media networks will increasingly characterize the protests in regional terms: Southeast protesters as separatist adjacent, Northwest protesters as opposition coordinated, Lagos protesters as TUC political theater. This is already beginning. Its purpose is to prevent the cross-regional solidarity that would make the protests politically uncontainable. Watch for this framing in state-aligned media over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Here is what to watch that will tell you whether any of this is real. Watch the National Assembly committees on poverty alleviation and social investment. If they schedule public hearings with mandatory production of the beneficiary payment logs, the actual disbursement records, that is a genuine accountability signal. If they pass a resolution calling on the executive to expedite implementation, that is theater. Also watch the World Bank. The bank's endorsement silence is load-bearing right now in this story. If the bank issues any statement modifying its support language, even subtly, the political pressure on this administration changes overnight. Now, the question I open this analysis with: the figure who sits at the intersection of every major palliative program Nigeria has run since 2016, from conditional cash transfers to the school feeding scheme to the survival fund, and who has never been held publicly accountable. That figure is not a single person, it is an office. Specifically, the Social Investment Office and its successor structures, whose directors have been appointed and removed without Senate confirmation, whose accounts have been consolidated into broader ministry budgets that obscure any program-specific expenditure, and whose forensic audit has been recommended in writing but never ordered by any administration. The accountability gap in Nigeria's palliative architecture is not personal, it is structural. It was built into the original executive order, it has survived every administration restructuring, and it has been defended quietly, persistently, and effectively by the people who benefit most from it remaining intact. Where does Nigeria end up in 5 years if this trajectory continues? If the NIMC social register gap is not closed, if procurement in social investment remains outside competitive bidding requirements, if the electoral logic of keeping the system broken continues to outweigh the governance logic of fixing it, Nigeria in 2030 is a country where protests are seasonal events, where each cycle of street anger is managed through announcement rather than delivery. The infrastructure of extraction will become more sophisticated with each iteration, and each cycle of protest that fails to produce structural change will teach the political class that the cost of non-delivery is manageable and that the rewards of non-delivery are considerable. Here is what I want you to sit with and drop in the comments. The protests are spreading. The numbers in the streets are real. The anger is documentable, specific, and justified. So at what point does the political cost of those streets exceed the cost of actually closing the beneficiary database gap? And who in Nigeria's system today has both the institutional power and the personal incentive to make that calculation? If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what's really happening in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.